What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. This is TW Motorsports, and today we are back on the Green Sierra. Now, what is it we are wanting to do today? First of all, I have a big mess. As you can see, this is the cover for the Vet, and I've just got stuff everywhere in here. I'm really looking forward to that shot, but I am going to try my darndest to get this motor in this thing today. So, what we have here, as you can see, I painted it, and I just used some Duplicolor engine enamel. I did clean it up really good. I went over it 2 or 3 times with the engine enamel, got it cleaned up, but I'm going to start by, I got a new battery tray. You guys know that my old battery tray was junk, and I did order this. I'll list this in the description down below. I don't have it bolted in yet because I'm going to have to grab some new bolts. The old ones were completely rusty and nasty, so I'm going to get that in. I also got a new coolant overflow. So the coolant reservoir right here that I have is a new one that I bought, and I'll list it in the description below as well. I had the old one, but to be honest with you guys, it was all yellowed and looked nasty, and to me, if you're going to spend the time to clean this up, you might as well replace little things like that. It was relatively cheap. I also have the engine mounts painted, the AC compressor painted, or the bracket, I guess, that holds the compressor. So what I plan to do first is we may work on the harness first, because these are just little things that I can bolt in, and I would like to drag it back a little bit. But the reason I say I work on the harness is because it is gross, and I'm not going to put this dirty harness back in. So what I did was I got some new loom. So in the sections where it's really big, I'm probably going to clean that area, but this little stuff, I ordered all sizes so we can go back over, put new loom on, because I will tell you guys, when I did the Trans Am, I cleaned every little spot of this, and that took forever, so I'm not going to do that. It's cheap as wire loom is. You might as well go ahead and replace it. So I'm going to drag this thing out. We're going to lay it kind of out here on the ground, and I'll probably time lapse most of it, but we're going to strip this old stuff off. We'll kind of do it piece by piece so we know kind of what we're doing and what we need to put back, and then at that point, we can roll the truck back, get this on the motor. I actually want to put the harness on the motor while it's going into the truck. That way I'm not trying to snake behind stuff and bolt stuff on. It just makes it easier to put it all in at one time. So as you can see, I have the harness all laid out. And what I kind of got here is, obviously, I've got 3 different sizes of loom, and then I've got something to cut it with. I've got a small flat blade screwdriver to take some of the connections loose, and then we're going to put them right back in where they go. And then of course, some electrical tape. I've got some toothbrush and some cleaning stuff so we can clean what I'm not gonna change. So like parts like this where they're wrapped in tape, I'm not gonna concern myself with those. I'm just gonna try to clean it up really good. And then the areas, as you can see, that are just loom, we're gonna replace that loom with new loom, new tape, and make it look all nice before we go back together with it. So we're gonna get started. Like I said, I'll probably time lapse the majority of this because this is going to probably take me a few hours to do, at least to get to where I feel like I like it. So let's get started. So, oh my gosh, guys, what a mess. I think we're finished. So I went through everything. I did end up keeping some of it. The problem is you know, you want to keep the clips in the same spot. So I tried to pull the loom out from under the clip and then immediately put the clip back in place just so you knew where everything was. But I think we're finished up. I am going to have a couple pieces I'm going to redo, but we're going to be adding electric fans to it. So I'm going to leave where it plugs into the computer undone, because we are going to have to repin that or at least slide a pin in for the actual electric fan. So I'll get to that later on, because that can be done once this is in the car. But for now, I think we're ready to go to the engine and get it all unwrapped and get this lined up and mounted on the actual engine. So now that we're finished with the harness, I'm going to go ahead and put this new tank in. Like I said, I ordered a new tank, and I'll list this in the description down below as well. I did reuse my cap because it was in good shape, and I was going to reuse the one out of the parts truck, but it was all yellow and gross looking too. But I think I'm going to have to source some new bolts for the piece that I showed that goes under the let me see if I can move it down here. It might be a little noisy, but the piece here that goes underneath the battery, all my bolts were completely rusted and gross, and I don't want to use those. So I'm going to have to find some bolts for that, so I may not actually get that done today. But we are going to go ahead and put this in, and it is just 2 bolts that hold it in place. Now it does snap in the fender. You can see my truck's rolling. Kind of snaps here in the fender. My antenna's kind of in the way. Really not a whole lot to it. I'm going to have to push my antenna down though. For you guys that don't know, I did relocate my antenna. There's just a 10mm bolt that goes here in the bottom. So I got that bolted in. I did measure the other one, and it's the same height. So maybe it just looks tall to me. It just looks like, it kind of looks to me like it wouldn't clear the hood, but maybe the hood has a spot there. I actually found in my parts truck some bolts to go into this spot here that holds the battery down. And for some reason, there's several. There's like, let's see here, 1, 2, if I can move the camera down so you guys can see it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 total that hold this thing in place. It's kind of ridiculous, honestly. I don't think it probably needs that many. But, I don't know, maybe it does. It just seems like a lot to me. Anyway, we're going to get it bolted into place. Shouldn't take long. When I say that, I can't really get to my impact right now, so I'm going to have to do it by hand. But after I get this bolted down, we're going to go grab some parts and start putting on the outside of the motor. So I need to strip down some of the tape on the motor and get it basically ready to go back in. So we'll get these in and move to the motor. So the very first thing we're putting on is the motor mounts, and I am using the original hardware. And I will tell you guys that you can paint these bolts. I did paint, obviously, the motor mounts, but if you paint the bolts, the first time you touch them with a wrench, it just destroys them. So I didn't see the point in painting them. To be honest, I probably didn't even have to paint the motor mounts, but you do see the top of them. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get these snug down. And we'll talk about torque specs here in a minute. I actually don't know them off the top of my head. I'm going to have to look them up in my book. I believe these are 13mm. And like I said, they're not side specific, so the same mount goes on both sides, literally same part number, so don't worry about getting the wrong one on the wrong side. So it's actually 15mm. It's been a while since I looked at this thing. So 37 foot-pounds, and I'm going to go bottom to top, kind of alternate. Most of the things that bolt to the block, to be honest with you, at 37 foot-pounds, when I saw that number, I should have known that. But I think since we're on this side, I'm going to go ahead and grab the AC and get it into place, at least the bracket for sure, and maybe even the compressor itself. So you can see I've got the AC bracket started, and this thing's a little odd in the way that it mounts. You actually only have 3 bolts that mount the bracket itself, and then one of your bolts that actually holds the compressor on also holds it to the block. So it's kind of odd. And these 3 are different links than the ones that hold the actual compressor in place. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put these in place. I'm going to torque them to 37 foot-pounds. And you can see I did paint this a little bit too. I didn't get real crazy on cleanup on it because you're really not going to see it. Now, I didn't paint the compressor, but I didn't want to spend the time to tape everything off. And like I said, it's pretty low mounted anyway. But let's go ahead and torque these to 37 foot-pounds, and then we'll put the compressor up in place. Now that we've got that on there, we can go ahead and set our compressor up. And like I said, it's a little awkward in the way that it fits, but you have 4 bolts that hold it on. One of them's really short, and you'll see that it's pretty obvious which one the short one is. It's going to be in this top corner because look how far through it needs to go to get to the bracket here. It needs to go quite a ways. But on this top one back here, you got a little small one. And I have to remember too that I put little plugs in here to keep from getting junk in it while it's set. Now I did clean this thing up a little bit, but I decided not to paint it. To be honest with you, it came out of the swap truck. Now the 4.3 one and this are the exact same. So if you want to use the one on your 4.3, you can. And I probably should have, just because I know the one on my 4.3 worked, and I never tested this one, so it may not work when we fire it up. I may have to pull it back out. I'm hoping that isn't the case, but same thing here. I'm going to put 37 foot-pounds on this. And then we will go on to the other side, probably get that other motor mount in place. I'm going to have to pull some tape off at some point. I'm not really sure here. Probably should have already started that. So I got to thinking, actually, one of the things that I did take off and paint was the front assembly here that holds the power steering pump. In order to do that, I did take the pump off, which means you have to use the puller. I don't know if I showed that in the video, but I'm putting it back together. Just 3 bolts that hold that on, and then obviously we have to press the power steering pump pulley back on. Now, if you use like a turn 1, they have holes, so you don't have to do this, which is really nice, believe me. But I am going to be reusing the stock one, so I'm going to go ahead, tighten these up, and then we'll press that pulley back on. So for the actual bolts that go from the bracket to the pump, I'm going to torque those to 18 foot-pounds. That's the best I could find. And then the actual bracket to the motor, we'll get into that here in a minute. But I need to get these torqued before I obviously get the pump or the pulley on. And 18 is not a whole lot. Just want to make sure it's nice and snug. We should be good there. Now I'm going to grab the pulley and the installer, and we will get it into place. At this point, I've got the tool to push this back into place, and so what we're going to do is try to thread it back in. And I did put a little bit of WD-40 on it just because it doesn't act like it wants to go in real well. The center of this should be threaded, so what goes into the actual pump itself, but for some reason mine is wanting to turn, as you can see. I may have to put a little bit in here, clean out the threads. Acts like it wants to go. And we will try again here. I have a feeling it still doesn't feel like it's quite in there where it needs to be. You're going to need a pretty decent grab for it to hold. Yeah, I think we just came loose again. We did. All right, so I'm gonna have to, I think, go get something to clean those threads out on the inside of the pump. But that is the process. So basically, you're just pulling it back on, and I won't show you guys that because it's gonna take me a little bit to get that in place. I'll tell you guys that for some reason the center of this is threaded, so you can pull it back on. For some reason, like I said, there was a ton of dirt and dust in there. I think I've got it out for the most part, but this thing will fight you majority of the way, just like it does coming off. So it's almost on. Once we get it on, then we can probably go ahead and mount this to the front of the motor. So now that we have that on, I'm gonna go ahead and put this thing up into place. And guys, it mounts in a couple different spots. It's really awkward. Of course, it's dripping on me, but so about right there is where it goes. So we're going to need our long bolts. And what I think I'll do is I'll start one of the top ones first, because this is not the lightest assembly. And of course, I'm trying not to scratch it, you know. And no, I didn't paint these bolts either. Kind of the same situation. You paint the bolts, and then the first time you touch them, all the stuff comes off. So you got 4 long ones, and you can see it's dripping fluid. I'll clean that up here in a little bit, but 4 long ones here that go in and start. And you can see I also peeled the tape back on the head. I didn't really want to take it off yet because I wasn't quite ready to put everything on. So these are 15 millimeter. I'm going to tighten them up by hand, actually with a ratchet probably. And once I get them tightened up by hand, then I'll go ahead and torque them down to 37 foot-pounds. Now there is one other bolt that goes in the back, and it's just kind of to help stabilize things. So go ahead and put it in as well. That's the little short one. And then, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and torque everything to 37 foot-pounds. So the last thing I'm going to put on is this, and I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, like, what about the harmonic balancer? This is just the idler itself, but as far as the harmonic balancer, I'm probably going to upgrade to a different one, so that's why I haven't put it in yet. And honestly, guys, I can do that in the car. So I'm just going to snug this up. You don't want to get this too tight. If you want to torque it, maybe 18 foot-pounds. I've just always got them snug. You want them to still be able to roll, but not move around. Pretty much the whole front drive assembly on, and I did go ahead and torque this to 18 foot-pounds. You noticed I've drug all the tape off of it. So the reason I did that is because we are now going to go ahead and put the push rods in. I've got them all cleaned up, sitting right here. I did just wipe them down a little bit, and then I actually blow through them to make sure there's nothing on the inside. Now, what I do before I put them in is I'm going to dip them in oil on both sides and then go ahead and drop them into place. Once we get those on, then we can go grab the rocker arms. I'm going to spray them down real good, make sure they're clean, and we'll set those in place also. Now, like I said, I am using the stock ones. And the reason being, guys, is this cam isn't that big, and it doesn't require a bigger or longer push rod. Also, when they did my heads, they take the valve down the same amount, so you don't have to worry about trying to find new push rods. Like I said, we'll get these in, and then we will go grab the rockers and the stands, and we'll get them into place. So I got them all cleaned off. We're just going to set them in place here. And to me, it's easiest to do it that way, all at one time. I also like to keep them, the rocker with the stand that it came with, just because it tends to wear a little bit of a pattern in that rocker stand. So if you want to take them off and clean them individually like I did, I just did that off camera, you can. So now I'm going to go run, I'm going to grab an 8 millimeter, and I'm just going to run these down to snug, and then we'll tighten them up. I'm not going to worry about turning the motor over and torquing them down while one cylinder is on the upstroke and all that. I did that on the Trans Am. If you guys want to go back and look at that, you can. But I'm not going to do that on this. So I'm literally just going to run these down, and then I'm going to torque them to 22 foot-pounds.
So I'm sure a couple people are going to ask, like, why didn't you do a trunnion upgrade? Well, to be honest with you guys, this cam really isn't big enough to warrant needing one. So that's why. And then some people use some Loctite on these. I decided not to. But 22 foot-pounds is what we're going to do. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to torque every one of them to 22 foot-pounds on both sides. And then I'm going to roll the motor over, and then I'm going to torque them one more time just to make sure that everything is good. So 22 is not a ton, but you can see that I probably should have torqued them or tightened them down a little more by hand. We weren't even close to 22. Of course, you're going to start to push the valve down if you're on that cylinder that happens to be going down, or the piston seems to be going down at that time. But the other thing I like to do is I like to try to keep them centered with the valve. So a lot of times they'll want to move from one side to the other. Just try to keep them centered as you're tightening them down. Generally they'll self-align, but there's no sense in making more work for yourself or hoping that they do and then they don't. And we got a lot of work here. Probably could have, like I said, ran them down a little tighter by hand. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and torque these down. Like I said, we'll put a bolt in the end of the crank. We'll roll the motor over, and we'll torque them again. So now that we've got them all torqued down, like I said, we're going to roll the motor over. And you just want to make sure that they're all moving up and down. Obviously, when you're putting them in place, you want to make sure that the push rod goes in place on the back side of them. And then we'll go back through and torque each one down again to 22. That's not the way most people would say you should do it. They say you should tighten it down. I believe you tighten the exhaust valve when the exhaust valve is coming, basically closing, and right before the intake opens, I believe, if I remember right. But nonetheless, I've never had any issue doing it this way, and this is the way I'm doing it. So I think we've been around a couple times. Looks like everything's moving well, so we're going to go ahead and torque them one more time. And then, well, I'll show you here in just a second what we're going to do as far as valve covers. So for now, what I'm going to put on is just some stock ones that I have. And I mean, I'm going to put stock ones on anyway, but I'm going to paint them. So I don't want to screw up all the paint, because if I put the ones I'm painting on now, obviously I'm going to screw it all up when I go to put the wiring harness on and everything. So I'm going to attempt to paint and then put them on. So for now, no, this is not going to be permanent, and I know it doesn't look as good as the rest of the motor, but we're going to go ahead and put these on until the other ones are painted and the engine's in. So after that, I'm going to put some tape here just to keep junk out of it, and then I'm going to put some tape over the intake runners here, and then we are ready to go grab the harness. We're going to start threading the harness through and putting everything where it needs to go, and we're going to drop this thing in this truck. So at this point, what I've got is I've got the entire harness kind of set on the motor. I've got the biggest part that goes to the computer on that side, the rest of it on this side. And you can kind of tell based on your injector hookups, we know that this goes to the transmission, so it's going to go to the back. And so injector hookups are here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually start on the other side. We're going to bolt some things up, including the grounds and whatnot. And then we're going to get kind of everything laid out to where it needs to be. I'm going to go ahead and put the ground bolts like in the back of the head. And that's the reason I like to take the harness out with it. To me, it's easier than trying to sneak your hand back behind there and hook that up. So, and you can also see, since I'm laying it on top of this, why I chose to put the valve covers on later. But I think I'm going to go through, I'll probably time lapse most of this, and we'll just snake some wires through, plug stuff in, and get this thing ready to hook up. You can see I already taped everything off. Also got my LS adapter on the center so we can get the cherry picker and get this thing set into place. Now I will also say, once I get the harness picked up, we'll talk about the actual motor mounts, because there are two pieces.
This is just the piece that goes on the block, and then there's a separate piece that actually bolts to the frame itself, and we'll talk about that as we get closer to that point. So at this point, as you can see, I have everything kind of wrapped up on top of the motor, and I can still get to my little hook here so I can hook the motor. And I've got everything plugged in. So we got the grounds on the back of the head. That's the biggest thing, to be honest with you guys, that you can't reach. The rest of the stuff you could probably reach from the bottom side. And honestly, if you wanted to do the harness or leave the harness in the truck, you could go back and probably get to this. It'd be easy without the transmission in the way, but I like doing it like this. I went ahead and hooked up crank position sensor, oil level. These two are for my starter. Obviously we had the motor mounts on, and then your AC, there's 2 plugs for your AC, and then we did run that line underneath like normal, and then everything hooked up on this side, including a ground that goes on the block. There's actually 2 grounds. Hopefully you guys can see that. But now we need to get this thing ready to put in. So like I said, I'm going to there's actually 2 parts to the mount. So you've got the regular engine mount there, and then there's 15 millimeters that come in, and they actually go into these guys. Now these go in with these long bolts right there, and this is actually the one for the driver's side, I believe. And then you can't get them wrong because it'll only fit on one side. So I'm going to go ahead and run those bolts in. So those long bolts on both sides, putting those in place, and then we'll see if we can hook this motor and get it set down into place. Just hopped in here and bolted those down, and I just snugged them down with my impact. So I will tell you, there are longer bolts and shorter bolts. Your longer bolts go on the passenger side, and you'll see that because they won't, if you put them in the wrong spot, they won't want to reach, or you'll have too much thread here. So shorter bolts on this side, longer bolts on that side. So now I'm going to hook up this motor, and we're going to see if we can get this sucker in here. At this point, got the motor all lifted up off the engine stand, and I'm ready to go in place. Now, one thing you probably should do before you put the motor down is you need to put your transmission lines in place. So yes, these are the original 4.3 lines, because I'm probably going to hack into them to put a cooler up front. Even if you don't though, it still should fit. You may have to bend them a little bit, but you definitely want to put those in place. The length from like up here to the radiator back to the back is the same because honestly the transmission mounts in the same spot, so no big deal there. And then the transmission lines actually come out on the same side because they're both 4L60s, and you can use the old transmission. It just doesn't seem to last as long. Honestly, I don't know if they're built any different, but it just seems like the 6-cylinder one doesn't last long behind a V8. So and the transmissions aren't real strong anyway. I'm going to go ahead and lift this thing up, see if we can swing it into place, and drop it down in here. So as you guys can see, I did get into this piece of plastic here. Man, I'm telling you guys, there's not a ton of room. It probably would be easier without the front assembly on. I guess I should have put it on in the truck, but we're in. And we're setting on the motor mounts. These bolts on this side are lined up. I'm gonna have to move it around to line up the ones on the other side, but I'm pretty excited. The fact that the thing is in is exciting me. Now, I did probably scrape a little on the pan that I'll probably have to touch up. And honestly, unless you want like something perfect, guys, it doesn't matter. Just you spend the time to paint this, you want to try to keep it nice. But I think we're doing good here. I'm gonna go ahead, run those bolts in, those 3 bolts that go in the actual motor mount that bolt to the motor, and that will bolt to that plate. And I'm just gonna get them snug for now, and we'll come back with the torque specs later. And then I might try to unfold some of this and then swing, obviously, my cherry picker out of the way once I get it bolted on. So like I said, now that I've got it in here, I got the motor mounts just snug. Like I said, we'll go back and torque them at a later time. We're gonna try to route this stuff around kind of where it needs to be. So at this point, I think we are going to be finished. I'm tired, guys. I've been working on this for probably a couple weeks, just on and off. As you might have noticed, the lighting's probably different in different parts of the video, but I just haven't had a ton of time. So we at least got the motor in today, and I'm excited about that. I have moved some of the wires around just to kind of get them in the area that they're going to go, but we still have a lot to do there. So in the next video on this truck, we will move all the wires where they need to be. I'll probably have my wife and son come help me put the hood on probably this evening, just so I can get it. It's in an extra room in my house, and it's kind of taking up some space. So I would like to get it back on, and I don't want to risk it getting scratched or something. So get it back on. Like I said, I won't show you guys that, but in the next video, hopefully we can get these wires hooked up, maybe even get the trans in, and maybe the intake on, and just start to button things up. I think we're probably a couple videos from having it running because I have a couple other things to order. I still need to get headers. I don't have those yet. I'll probably go ahead and order those, but we're getting closer, guys. So if you do like this progress, if you like this build, like always, please smash that thumbs up button. If you are not subscribed, guys, go down, hit that subscribe button. While you're down there, make sure you ring the bell icon. That notifies you every time we drop a new video, and stay tuned to see this thing come together.